how many people saw the movie Being the Riccardos? Being the Riccardos. On our, of course, native Lucille Ball. I watched it, and as I was watching it, part of the story dealt with the issue of whether Lucille Ball was a communist. Was a communist. So that grabbed my attention. At that same time, I was interviewing at the Jackson Center Kathleen Brady. Kathleen Brady had written a book entitled Lucy, the Lucille Ball story in 1994. In prepping for the interview, I read the book. Always a good thing to do. And by the way, I highly recommend you get and read the book that Walt put up that we'll be talking about a week from now. I digress. But so within that is, in fact, a wonderful description of what was going on in Lucille Ball's life in 1953, when, how many remember the name Walter Winchell? Walter Winchell, you saw that on the Being the Riccardos, that in September of 1953, just prior to the commencement of the third season of I Love Lucy, Walter Winchell announces over his big broadcast and also wrote an article that appeared in the Los Angeles Herald Examiner querying about registered red in 36 Lucille Ball. And then there was a other headline on the next day, Lucille Ball was red in 36. Well, this is right at the beginning of the third season, so needless to say, Lucille Ball went into a deep, dark funk. Desi Arnaz, you saw the movie, and it was true. The facts that showed out there were true, which ultimately led to Desi Arnaz on the evening of the first performance on October 12th, 1953, live audience, gets up and talks about his wife and talks about how much he loves her and that they both hate communism because it was communism that kicked him out of the country in Cuba, and that she's not a red, and the only thing that's red about Lucille Ball is her hair, and that's not true either. So, and he announced at that time, hence the program idea, that he would be disclosing the next day the transcript of the interview of September 4th, 1953, a month earlier, which Lucille Ball was asked to meet William Wheeler on the House Un-American Activities in Hollywood to go through a line of questioning. So I thought it would be based on the movie, based on the interest of Lucille Ball in our area, based on facts, that Judge Hanlon, and you got to know Judge Hanlon is a big deal. She's the first female Supreme Court Justice in Chautauqua County ever. So in our world, she's our Sandra Day O'Connor. And so I'm thrilled that she had a sense of humor to receive my call and to play Lucille Ball. So what we're doing here is a play read. And this is being filmed for posterity. And the National Comedy Center, frankly, is very interested to know what we do with this. So with that, I am going to be Mr. Wheeler. This is the testimony of September 4th, 1953. Lucille Ball appeared voluntarily. She received a phone call, and she said, I would be glad to answer questions so they did not have to subpoena. Thank you. That's why they don't invite me to court. Subpoena her to be there. So here we go. So, paperclip off. Here we go. Lucille Ball. When did you first register to vote?
I guess the first time I ever did was in 36.
I would like to hand you a photostatic copy of a voter's registration and ask you if that is your signature.
That looks like my handwriting.
You will note that the party that you intended to affiliate with at that time was the Communist Party.
In 36?
Yes.
I guess so.
You did register to vote then as a communist or intending to vote the communist ticket?
Yes.
Would you go into detail and explain the background, the reason you voted or registered to vote as a communist or a person who intended to affiliate with the Communist Party?
It was my grandfather, Fred C. Hunt. He just wanted us to, and we just did something to please him. I didn't intend to vote that way. As I recall, I didn't. My grandfather started years ago. He was a socialist, as long as I can remember. He is the only father we ever knew, my grandfather. My father died when I was tiny, before my brother was born. He was my brother's only father. All through his life, he had been a socialist, as far back as Eugene V. Debs, and he was in sympathy with the working man as long as I have known, and he took the daily worker. It never meant much to us because he was so radical on the subject that he pressed his point a little too much. Actually, probably during our childhood, because he finally got over our heads and we didn't do anything but consider it a nuisance. But his dad, and he got into his 70s, and it became so vital to him that the world must be right 24 hours a day, all over it, and he was trying his damnedest to do the best he could for everybody, and especially the working man. That is, from the garbage man, the maid in the kitchen, the studio worker, the factory worker. He never lost a chance to do what he considered bettering their positions. Sometimes it got a little ridiculous, because my position in the so-called capitalist world was pretty good, and it was a little hard to reconcile the two. We didn't argue with him very much because he had a couple of strokes, and if he got overly excited, why, he would have another one. So finally there came a point where my brother was 21, and he was going to see that Freddie registered to help the working man, which was, in his idea then, to be the Communist Party. At that time, it wasn't a thing to hide behind doors to be a member of the party.
He considered the Communist Party a working man's party?
That's all I ever heard. I never heard my grandfather use the word communist. He always talked about the working man and read the Daily Worker. He got very confused in his later years when Russia and who got together? Russia and Germany.
That's right. Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Not to my knowledge.
Have you ever been asked to become a member of the Communist Party?
No.
Did you ever attend any meetings that you later discovered were Communist Party meetings?
No.
Do you know whether or not any meetings were ever held in your home at 1344 North Ogden Drive?
No, I know nothing of that. I don't believe it's true.
How old were you in 1936?
I'm 42 now, so 24.
I would like to introduce the Affidavit of Registration number 847584. This Affidavit of Registration is signed by Lucille Ball and dated the 19th of March, 1936. Have you ever known an individual by the name of Emil Fried?
I never heard that name before, to my knowledge, as I recall.
Are you aware that you were a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party for the year 1936?
Was I aware before you told me, you mean?
Yes.
No.
Well, I would like to hand you a document entitled Appointment of Members of the State Central Committee Meetings at Sacramento in the year 1936. It is stamped Communist Party, and this document discloses that Emil Fried was a delegate for the nomination to the State Central Committee of the Communist Party for that year. And he appointed 3 individuals as delegates. Those appointments, according to this document, are Jacob Berger, Fred Hunt and Lucille Ball?
I don't know a male Fred. I never heard of a male Fred. And if a male Fred appointed me as a delegate to the State Central Committee, it was done without my knowledge or consent.
Do you know who could be responsible for your name appearing on this document?
Possibly my grandfather, Fred C. Hunt.
I assume you did not attend the meeting of the State Central Committee at Sacramento.
I didn't even know there was one. I still don't know what it means.
I would like to refer you to the report of the Un-American Activities in California for the year 1943 and refer to page 127 of the document, which is a portion of an affidavit by Renee Vale. In this affidavit, she admitted she was one time a member of the Communist Party, and she is discussing how she became a member. Quote, that within a few days after my third application to join the Communist Party was made, I received a notice to attend a meeting on North Ogden Drive, Hollywood. Although it was typed, unsigned note merely requesting my presence at the address at 8 o'clock in the evening of a given day, I knew it was the long-awaited notice to attend a Communist Party new members class. Quote, that on arrival at this address, I found several others present. An elderly man informed us that they were the guests of the screen actress Lucille Ball and showed us various objects to establish that fact, and stated she was glad to loan her home for a Communist Party new members class. Do you have any knowledge of any meetings held in your home, Miss Ball?
None whatsoever.
Are you acquainted with Renee Vale?
I never heard the name before in my life.
Do you know whether or not your grandfather, Fred Hunt, held meetings at the home?
Not to our knowledge, ever.
I also have a photostatic copy of an affidavit of registration for the year 1936 for Mrs. Desiree E. Ball, and it discloses that she also registered to vote as a person who intended to affiliate with the Communist Party on the 12th day of June, 1936. What relation is Desiree Ball to you?
My mother.
Do you know whether or not she was ever a member of the Communist Party?
Not to my knowledge.
I have a second photostat here, a voter's registration signed by Fred Hunt, who also intended to affiliate with the Communist Party.
Fred C. Hunt?
Fred C. Hunt, rather. This document is dated the 12th day of June, 1936, and also shows he changed the vote to Democrat on November 18th, 1940. The affidavit of registration disclosed you voted in the primary for the year 1938. That affidavit of registration on the reverse side discloses that you signed 2 petitions for the year 1939, the Freed nominating petition for the 57th Assembly District, or rather, it is a sponsor certificate. This document was also obtained from the files of the Secretary of State, and I will introduce it in the record as Ball Exhibit Number 3. I would like to refer to the second page of this document, under line 23, where it appears the signature of Lucille Ball, 1344 Ogden Drive, and occupation, artist. It is dated June 16th, 1936. Is that your signature?
I would say it was.
Do you recall signing this document?
It is something I signed without looking at it, or if I looked at it, it didn't seem like a big thing at the time.
Are you familiar with the words or the phrase criminal syndicalism?
No, but it's pretty. What does it mean?
The communists were taken to court and tried to criminal syndicalism,
And I signed something else?
you signed the petition to take the criminal syndicate act off the statutes of the state of California.
I did? May I see my signature?
Unfortunately, they have destroyed those particular petitions.
By whom?
They are retained for a few years under law and then can be destroyed.
Was this the same time we were being nice to Daddy Week?
It was the year 1936.
I imagine that petition ties up with the Un-American Activities Committee business, constitutional rights they are all standing up for now. Is that what it means?
Well, it means more or less like this: an act defining criminal syndicalism and sabotage, prescribing certain acts and methods in connection therewith, and in pursuance thereof, and providing penalties and punishments therefore.
Well, anyway, I don't know what it means.
You were previously contacted by myself, an investigator for the House Committee on Un-American Activities.
Yes.
You will recall the date as April 3rd, 1952.
Yes.
Well, your name is mentioned in the Daily People's World on the issue of, this would be October 26, 1947, page 1, columns 5 and 6, as one of the high personalities who were sponsoring or a member of the Committee of the First Amendment. The committee was formed here in Hollywood to oppose the congressional hearings in 1947.
Fine. Then I have no knowledge of signing it.
Do you have anything in addition you would like to add for the record?
I have never done anything for communists, to my knowledge, at any time. I have never contributed money or attended a meeting or even had anything to do with people connected with it. And if, to my knowledge, they were. I am not a communist now. I have never been. I never wanted to be. Nothing in the world could ever change my mind. At no time in my life have I ever been in sympathy with anything that even faintly resembled it. He was always opposed to how my grandfather felt about any other way this country should be run. I thought things were just fine the way they were. It sounds a little weak and silly and corny now, but at the time it was very important because we knew we weren't going to have a daddy with us very long. If it made him happy, it was important at the time. But I was always conscious of the fact I could go just so far to make him happy. I tried not to go any farther. In those days, that was not a big, terrible thing to do. It was almost as terrible to be a Republican in those days. I have never been too civic-minded and certainly never politically minded in my life.
Thank you, Ms. Ball. You, the public who have listened to this transcript for the very first time, what do you think? Was she a communist or not?
No. No.
There it is. Right there. I'm going to let her honor go because she's got a trial starting at 1:15.
Yes, it's on its 8th day.
I see. And so one of the good things is it doesn't start until she shows up. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Grace Hanlon. Oh my God. You've got a Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg socks on.
More than just for you.
One of the fun things we recently did at the Robert Jackson Center was we had a play read, much longer and all dressed up, on the trial of Al Capone.
Well,
Cool. It's cool. And the author of that particular continuing education program was Scott Soroka, who was the Deputy United States Attorney for the Western District, who's the #2 person here. And he had brought along his boss, Trini Ross, who was the first female United States Attorney for the Western District. So she was here just a few weeks ago. We did this play read based on the trial. And what was of interest of the author who created the play read based on the actual transcripts was the fact that Scott Soroka's grandfather was one of the original Untouchables.
wow.
You may not know that Elliot Ness was from Chicago area and was created there and was designed to create this group, and he wanted people to assist him, and he went out and actively solicited people that would not be subject to bribe, which of course was Al Capone's stock and trade. So one of those was Scott Soroka's grandfather, who now is the Deputy U.S. Attorney and is a friend. So he did this and we did this. Now the other side of that story, and that's fun, it's on YouTube in case you're interested, is the fact that, as we know, the Untouchables, some of you remember that television program, Robert Stack, was produced by, quick question, who produced, you can't answer, who produced it? Desi Lou Productions.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
Now, Desi Lou Productions, of course, with Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball. And the fact of the matter is, we had recently Gary Hahn. I invited him to join us today, but Gary Hahn is a noteworthy scholar, worth inviting him at some point if you need somebody, to talk about the history of Desi Lou. Really, Desi Lou was one of their first big hits, was in fact The Untouchables. A great deal of controversy because he treated the Italians and the mob, and at the time the mafia, in a very not positive way, and he was under the threats of his life, etc. But the Desi Lou Productions came shortly after the creation of that, the I Love Lucy series, which of course they owned, and Desi Arnaz, Lucille Ball, 3 cameras, the whole 9 yards, a whole story unto itself. But it kind of all, interestingly enough, ties together with the fact that Lucille Ball in 1953 career could have imploded. And when you see Being the Riccardos, you will see Desi Arnaz making a very impassioned plea. And what you see in the movies was in fact fact. The only thing that was fabricated, for those who watched the movie, there was a scene right at the very end of Desi Arnaz's impassioned plea to the live audience, saying essentially, my favorite wife, Lucille Ball, and my favorite redhead, but the only thing red about her, and that's false itself, is her hair. They brought out a telephone, a phone call from J. Edgar Hoover, saying, oh, by the way, to the public audience, that no, Lucille Ball, we deemed her not to be a communist. Now that, in fact, that didn't happen. That phone call didn't happen, but that's essentially what the House Un-American Activities did. She was exonerated, recognizing that she signed what she signed in 1936 on behalf of her grandfather. You can look it up. They're all there. All the documents are there. Lucille Ball, communist. Lucille Ball, communist. Walter Winchell made a saying that all he really said was, hey, she was investigated. She was under subpoenaed, not subpoenaed, but she was under testimony as a red. That was the headline, and all hell broke loose. I could go on, but let me conclude before Kevin does this. Fred Hunt. When the whole Lucille Ball, Lucy Center, Lucy Desi Center, which has a whole interesting history as to here locally. So I thought I'd go out and track down old directories and find out where she lived. Where was she born, by the way? Everybody know?
I have Jamestown.
Jamestown, Stewart Street. And that's where she was born in Jamestown Hospital, then moved to Celeron. Her dad did die early on, and she went to move in with Fred Hunt. And Fred Hunt did, in fact, become her surrogate dad. Now, Fred Hunt lived, as you may know, Lucy Lane, up by the Resource Center, that area, the house, everybody knows that. And the story behind the house, is the fact that Fred Hunt had bought a BB gun. And on the side lot where the house was, he was showing off, doing some target practice with certain very young teenage kids. Just there's the target, typical what you'd do with a BB gun. Unfortunately, a person named Erickson, next door neighbor, was called by his mother to come home for lunch, ran across lot. Okay, you can visualize it. They're target practicing with the BB and hits the kid. one of the teenage persons who had to be there, and it became severely injured. And you see this in some documentaries where that led to a lawsuit. Lawyers, some of them, if you're around long enough, you would know them, got involved in starting an action against Fred Hunt and Desiree Ball. And Lucille Ball actually testified at the trial. It ultimately led to a judgment against Fred Hunt. And there was a judgment, and he had already had a mortgage on the property, couldn't pay either because of that. And so they lost the house to a foreclosure. And that led to Lucille Ball having to move down to Jamestown. There was an apartment right here on 5th Street where she lived for a short time before going off to New York. That whole story. But it's fascinating to me, kind of the legal questions that come up throughout her life. Lucille Ball, Fred Hunt, her beloved grandfather, who did later on move to Hollywood with her, and the rest is history. I'm going to stop right now. Any questions before I go into the sunset? Well,
I think everybody can relate to the idea of signing something, just sort of signing it. And I think we all do it, maybe at a doctor's office or somewhere. And you sign it because it's just pro forma. How binding are those things?
very. You're deemed to have understood exactly what you signed. I mean, sure, everybody says, I don't remember signing that. Therefore, as if that's some excuse, legal excuse, it ain't. You're deemed to know the law. I didn't know turning right here when it says don't turn on right. I didn't see that. Tough luck. Yes?
In those days, was Lucille as prepared as a client would be today?
Was Lucy prepared by her attorneys?
You know, that's a really good question. Clearly I don't know if she's prepared, but she had access to, because it's 1953 when she went before the House Unamerican Activities Committee. So she was a star, big, huge CBS star. I'm not sure she told CBS, but she would have had access to her own attorneys. So I think the answer is yes. I don't know. Very good question. I don't think she would just wing it. I mean, she's deemed to be quite a businesswoman, but on this type of thing, she clearly, in the course of just the answers to the questions. Anything else? Yes, John.
I understand that you are now admitting that you are a graduate of the Penn State Law School.
If you try, I just drove through State College, and however I answer this, it's probably cost me a happy buck to go through Happy Valley. But yeah, by default, I'm a graduate of the Dickinson School of Law, which Penn State merged with. So we are Penn State. I can do that. So yeah, John, if you're happy, I'm part of it. Trust me, they know where I am. I get more literature from State College, but no free tickets. Thanks for the leading question. Anything else? I applaud. By the way, I applaud Rotary for doing the tarp skunks. I got to throw that in. You got the schedules. I think Russ Dietrich probably handed out those blue cards at some other point. And if you have any questions, I got Sweeney and Troxel and Dietrich on top. But look at that hat. By the way, there was a baseball card, David. Hopefully you picked it up at the Sports Hall of Fame. So David Troxel, he's the best. He's out here supposedly doing. I know. At least he told me Troxel, end with Troxel. He's over there and in the Far East. He sends me a picture. He does the Lord's work, not only for Rotary, but for the Tarp Skunks. There's a guy with a cricket bat. A guy with a cricket bat and a Tarp Skunks hat. So there is now out there a baseball card of that heretofore unknown person, but he's a prospect. He's a prospect in our league. And so if you see somebody come up to bat with a cricket bat, it'll be David Troxel's prospect. With that, thank you very much.